Hello and welcome everyone to the Climate Crisis Think Global Act Local session. My name is Ibtihaj Hassan and I work with UN Global Compact as a project coordinator. And with us, we have our speakers, we have our internal teams and our guest live. So I think without further ado, let's start it. But before I begin, I'd like to thank the Forskningsrådet, which is the Research Council in Norway, for providing funding for the event. And I'd like to kickstart the session by introducing Leonie Goodwin, a manager of program and reporting. She'll basically talk about the role of UNGC as a convener on sustainability and the 10 principles. So I think over to you, Leonie.
Thank you, Ibtihaj. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our seminar, Climate Crisis, Think Global, Act Local. We at the UN Global Compact Norway are really delighted to bring together an impressive lineup of speakers to explore this important topic. For those of you who don't know us, the UN Global Compact is one of the world's largest initiatives for responsible and sustainable businesses. We have around 18,000 member businesses all over the world. And here in Norway, we're one of the fastest growing networks with over 400 members. And we offer our member businesses opportunities to connect, lead, communicate, and learn around sustainability and responsible business. And this includes running seminars like this one that bring together different actors with different knowledge, skills, and approaches to stimulate innovation, new thinking, and knowledge sharing. So as Ibtihaj said, today's seminar was made possible with funding from the Research Council of Norway, and we'll be hearing from leading researchers, practitioners and businesses from a range of sectors and locations who are going to share and inspire us with ideas around climate change mitigation, including strategies, frameworks and ideas for implementation. I'm sure, as many of you know, we're living in an unprecedented era of climate emergency where health, livelihoods, food security, water supply, human security, biodiversity and economic growth are all being threatened. We have very ambitious climate goals, but we still have a long way to go to reach them. And we're simply not making the change at the pace, scale and speed we need to. To achieve the 1.5 degree climate target and avoid the most dangerous impacts of climate change, we need to decarbonise at an annual rate of 15.2%. And to put that in perspective, in 2021, we achieved a 0.5% reduction in carbon intensity. So the scale of transformation needed is really unprecedented, and we need everyone to play a role. And the private sector particularly has a crucial role to play. In the Global Compact, we say that future-ready businesses view sustainability as both a responsibility and an opportunity. And we see that regulatory demands around climate change are really growing in this area, as is pressure from investors, customers, and other stakeholders. So the way business is done is actually changing, and this includes accessing finance, accessing markets, and customers. And more businesses are becoming aware that they need to respond and set goals and put in place strategies around their greenhouse gas emissions. On the opportunity side, businesses really have an important role to play with creativity and their action orientation to create solutions, scale up innovation, catalyse investment and redefine what it means to create value. The Global Compact has a set of 10 principles around different themes: environment, human rights, labour rights and anti-corruption. And these provide guidance and direction to our members, helping them connect the responsible side with the opportunity side. And they're also a reminder of how interconnected sustainability issues are. And as we'll hear today, climate change is deeply interconnected with other environmental issues such as biodiversity loss and consumption, overconsumption. And it's also deeply interconnected with social issues such as human rights, gender rights, and anti-corruption. And I think in seeing these interconnections is where both the challenges and opportunities lie. Enabling and supporting businesses to respond to climate change is one of our key priorities at the UN Global Compact. We're a co-partner in the leading Science-Based Targets initiative, and we have learning programs that help our member businesses set science-based targets. And here in the Norwegian network, we're also working on developing and promoting just climate transition plans. And these are plans that companies develop to show how they'll achieve emission reduction targets over the coming decades, addressing different kinds of climate risk, but at the same time respecting human and labour rights. Because we won't successfully address climate change unless we incorporate equity, dignity, and collaboration as well. So I do hope that today's seminar, featuring findings from research and practical solutions, provides you with some new perspectives and possibilities for collaboration. We'll begin by exploring sustainable business models and how to promote environmental stewardship. We'll then hear about some circular economy ideas to change the way we make, use and deal with products. We're then going to hear how businesses can evolve their approach when they're working with sustainability, moving towards being best in class, and how they can best contribute to the green transition. We have a speaker from Tromsø Kommune who'll share how they are working with climate, environment and energy on the ground at the local level. And finally, Rystad Energy will tell us about how they're helping companies make data-driven decisions in the energy sector. And then finally, in the breakout rooms, we'll be focusing on solutions and ways forward. So please enjoy listening to our speakers, and we hope you're inspired and challenged to carry forward some of the learnings into your work. Back to you, Ibtihaj. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Leonie, for such a warm introduction. Before I officially commence the session, a couple of ground rules. So each speaker will have like around 10 to 15 minutes to work on their presentation. I would recommend people and participants to write down their questions they have with respective speakers, because towards the end of the session, we'll have a half-an-hour discussion and question-answer session where we'll divide the speakers into their respective breakout rooms, and everybody who's attending can choose the breakout rooms with the respective speaker that they have questions for. So yeah, I'll officially begin. Our first lecture will be on by Knut Ivar on sustainable business model. He'll be focusing on the green economy transition and sustainable leadership. Knut is the director and partner Institute for Climate Psychology. He is specialized in applied behavioral economics, and he wants to improve the decision-making in organization and how to nudge for change. So over to you, Knut.
So thank you for letting me open the talk. So I'll just start by asking Leonie. So how long have you been in Norway?
I have been here 8 years.
8 years. So then you probably know that what you just introduced the session with is quite unheard of. So if you listen to the politicians, they're saying we'll continue as we've always done with oil and gas production. We don't really care about the emissions. If you listen to the industry leaders, they say we don't care about the nature initiative. We'll just continue using more and more nature for factories, cabins, roads, and everything until there's nothing left. So it sounds like you are a good Norwegian in terms of swearing in the church, because what you're saying is actually unheard of in terms of what most people believe. So last summer, there was also a survey with Norwegian public beliefs about climate, and they're actually quite similar to Americans. I think 20 or 25% of Norwegians don't believe that climate change is actually taking place. And it's not at least a human problem. It's something to do with the sun or something else. So we have a big challenge in front of us.
Yes, we do. We do.
So my talk is in 3 sections. What is sustainability? What is sustainable business, and how to develop sustainable leadership? So when I prepared this, I assumed there would be more consumer-oriented businesses. So I included something about climate nudging to influence people who don't care about climate to make better decisions. But when I listened to I saw the group of participants, I decided to take that out, because it turned out that most of the companies that at least were on the list yesterday were businesses with a different perspective. So I had a look at who's in the room or in different rooms, and I found that there are a broad range of industries present, interested in sustainability and climate. It's industry, energy, logistics, banking, finance, private sector, public sector, and others. And I saw that there are also a broad range of roles with mostly sustainability directors and advisors, communication professionals, and leaders. So that's who I'm talking to mainly. So I also made a decision to focus on the principle and conceptual, more strategies and approaches, and leave out the specific steps and actions. So if you have questions about that, I'll be glad to cover it, but I'll try to make it relevant for everyone. So I'm a group of 4 climate psychologists. We have a slogan called From Ego to Eco, and that's a kind of like a universal transition we need to see, because most people and most firms care mainly about themselves and not what's around them. So in order to manage the climate transition, we need to broaden our perspectives on what's important to achieve. So my background is actually mostly from business psychology. So I have a PhD in behavioral economics. I worked at business school and university in Oslo, mainly around leadership development. And I've also founded a couple of startups. So I would say that mainly what I've been doing for many years is to focus on how to make businesses better, and the recent years, how to make them more sustainable and climate friendly. So this is what I do, to put it shortly. And in terms of climate and sustainability, I have 2 roles. I've been working with, or I established the Institute for Climate Psychology with Per Espen Stoknes 4 years ago. And just last year, I got a new position at university at a newly formed unit called the Sustainability Lab, which is a collaboration between history and psychology. And here you see a list of the different questions I've been addressing in my work. So originally I worked with sustainable food choices and nudging consumers to make better choices. I'm still doing that, but the recent years has been more demand for sustainability strategies, how to measure firm sustainability in a quick and effective way, how to work more with leadership. And as you see from the list of clients, it's a broad range. And at university, we've been working with the same questions. And then for 3 UNGC partners called Soprasteria, Sparebanken 1 and Vålerenga. So I think I was, or my firm was among the first 100 members of UNGC in Norway. So the climate psychologists, we've been members the last 3-4 years. And in the Sustainability Lab, UNGC has provided us with the clients or the firms, and we've provided students and professors to help the firms. So I really recommend working with UNGC for everyone. It's a good thing. So this is what I've been doing as one project in recent years. So one question, as you see to the left, is what's the difference between climate and sustainability? What's actually sustainable leadership, and how to nudge and influence consumers? So as you see from the list of institutions at the bottom, our approach is to work with science for better practice. So it's always a good idea to use research to invent better ideas instead of starting on scratch. So let's start with question 1. What is actually sustainability? Well, as Leonie introduced, there are at least two big problems. One is about climate change, which everyone is becoming more and more aware of. And the second one is unsustainable maintenance of nature. We're destroying too much nature, which is the foundation for all life. So the question in my talk is, what does this have to do with businesses in Norway and in the Nordics? So one way of framing sustainability, and as we all know, the way we think about a problem influences how we solve it. So one framing, as you see on the left, is to see or say that we have 3 dimensions of sustainability: economic, social, and environmental. And then climate gas emissions are a small problem within the environment. There are other problems, with the people and everything Leonie said in the start. The other way to frame it is to say that these 3 dimensions are linked together. So it's like a package. And then we need to solve also the social and environmental problems together with economics. Because if not, if nature breaks down and we have serious natural disasters, the business and economics will also fail. So then we have problem 1 and 2, climate gas emissions and unsustainable nature conservation. And then the third problem is what Leonie also introduced, is overconsumption. So the interesting thing in Norway is that we come up on top of the list of the most sustainable countries in the world when you look into the data. But when we start looking at what's the impact of Norwegian consumption on the rest of the world, we end up almost at the bottom of the list. The list runs, I think, around 175, and we're on place 155. Because we're so wealthy, we produce so much oil that's consumed elsewhere, and all the clothes we wear and 60% of the food we consume is produced in other countries. So we leave quite a bad footprint on the rest of the world. But Norwegian politicians favor the top of the list and say, once again, we're heroes and the best people in the world. It's not true. The next question is, are we good at conserving our nature? And as you see from this map, I think we've lost about 95% of all our nature that we used to have 100 years ago. So it's like a catastrophe, and it's continuing today. The last 10 years, the numbers I've seen, we've never seen such a speed and desperation in destroying nature for industry, roads, cabins. Just before Christmas, I found that we have planned 210,000 football fields of cabins in Norway. So what's happening is a version of the a tragedy of the commons back in the 1600s, where all the people in England just could leave their cows and sheep and goats on common land. So they just grazed everything down until nothing was left. And that's the same thing that's happened in Norway. The road builders, cabin builders, factory owners, the state, energy companies, everyone is just wanting more and more. So there's less and less left, and more is taken every year. So what we see, there's a big gap between intentions and reality in our country, but it's not known. So this one way of seeing the problem is that we then have unsustainable decisions and behaviors that's leading to unfavorable consequences in terms of climate and gas emissions and nature destruction. But then the main question is this the whole story? And of course not. So the problem, which is the real foundational problem, is in terms of people. It's what people think, it's what firms think, and what's the whole economic system thinks. And the simple slogan is that more is better. So and the more is better idea leads to overconsumption, and the more is better in terms of money leads to social costs and environmental costs. So we need to address all these problems together, but we need to also look deeper into the human mind and the human cultures in terms of what do we believe is a good life. So the last 400 years, we've had a more is better idea. And some people have said, we weren't like this when we lived in caves. But I recently saw an article with historians who had looked into the Vikings' consumption patterns and fishing patterns. And they estimated that Vikings also were good at just fishing all the fish that was available. So there must be something deeper with us that we need to change to manage the crisis or challenges ahead. So the question is always, who should change? Well, what governments can do is, of course, regulate. But when you look at the big pictures, the real polluters, the real big ones who are taking the most nature, they're businesses and organizations. They have the most resources and structures and systems that makes that possible. So in terms of influencing people, that's a bigger challenge, and because most people have limited decision capacity and cannot take on too many climate decisions every day. So this illustration says, Well, at the core of all of this, we need to design systems in terms of governments, businesses, institutions, where people are focused on economic, social, and environmental decisions. We need to take care of all three dimensions at once. And in terms of our private lives, this means that we need to have enough money to be mentally healthy and a good life, to have extra resources for good decisions. And the same is relevant for businesses and countries. So this is a short summary about how should companies think about sustainability. If we only think about climate, we will hear from Ernst, then you start counting the number of gasoline cars versus electric cars. And where he lives, isn't that a good infrastructure for driving electric cars, because the distances are too great and you need a plane to get to the closest city. So, but when we need to look also at nature and how to combine caring for people with economic growth. So it's all three together. So a common concept is also sustainable development. And that's kind of mixed together with sustainability, but it's actually a very simple question about what will the world look like in one generation compared to now. So the way we're headed now, it's a bad outcome, because the next generation will have less resources and less chances of having a good life compared to our generation. So then what's a sustainable business? So part of what I'm telling you here will be informed by my work in the food industry. And so please take that into account. So 3 questions. What sustainability model to use? Because there are many around. What's a useful model? And how to use the model to measure your business? So these are short and sweet answers. Today, there's a range of models. This is only in the food industry. So no wonder that new firms or firms that are new to sustainability become confused. What should we choose? Should we choose all the UN sustainability goals, or is poverty an issue in Norway? So maybe we should take that out and blah, blah, blah. Lots of difficult questions or decisions. When we look into the financial industry, which is present today, I heard in a talk that there are, I think, 160 different measurement systems for green and sustainable decisions in the finance industry. So all of these different systems make it confusing what the state of the nation and state of the companies are. So here are 4 suggestions for criteria for what's a good model. So I suppose some of the listeners are wondering, well, how should we measure our sustainability? What should we do? So my suggestion is to use something that you can talk about, that people can remember, so that it influences your daily operations. It should also be comprehensive, so it covers the UN sustainable goals. It should be applicable, so it can cover indicators that are relevant for your specific business, which means that the energy sector versus the food sector versus the public sector, you might use the overall general model, but the indicators under each main section might be different. And it should be able to transfer into something that's measurable and monitorable. So my personal experience in the project I mentioned is that we used a United Nations model from the food industry called SAFA. And then we had a Norwegian scientist translate it into Norwegian and make it relevant for our context. And then I, as an organizational psychologist, translated it into a measurement system for food business. It took 15 minutes to score all of this, which made it applicable. So then, as you see, we made a pulse check, which is a quick thing. And we also made a health check, which is a deeper analysis. But all of these answers, they were answered by the leaders in the company. And when they had these questions from the United Nations system that they couldn't answer, of course, it led to learning. And when they had to share the answer, it also led to alignment and then to action. So this is an actionable approach for starting to become more sustainable. So why should you use the same model? Well, at least from the food sector, we saw a lot of different models, which made the level of sustainability very difficult to analyze and understand across the value chain, and also between countries and between regions of the world. So our main conclusion was that we recommended to use the United Nations SAFA guidelines to use the same criterion model across the whole value chain to drive improvements. So these are the main conclusions. So my main suggestion is to choose a model that's simple to use and simple to remember, and to make it relevant for your business, and just measure yourself right away. Start asking the leaders the questions about how they think the organization is doing, and then discuss that. That's a good and easy start. So in all organizations, the leaders drive the business. So it's about people and groups of people. So then the question is, what can leaders do to help their business become more sustainable? 3 questions. What's a sustainable business strategy? How to design a sustainable organization? And how to enable sustainable leadership? So here we have 2 approaches, and both can be equally good depending on where you are. So some organizations start by organizing the sustainability work in terms of a strategy and finding a sustainable or sustainability director and having a sustainability team, and then they start implementing out in the organization. In other organizations, they start with the leaders they have, and they start asking the leaders, what does nature mean to you? And how do you see the impact of your business on the environment? So that's a different approach, which starts with the people and starts with their values. So this is a principal illustration of a typical sustainability strategy. So we can look for words about sustainability in the vision and mission statements, in the value statements, in the strategic longer-term objectives for where the organization is going, or in the operational specific objectives for the coming years, like the KPIs. So then our question is, what does this actually look like in Norway? Well, I have most experience with a couple of industries, and it looks like this. There are lots of high-level ambitions and positive intentions. Some organizations have made it into longer-term objectives, like becoming a leading operator in terms of sustainability in their industry. But what's missing is more specifics, and more specific measurable items. So it's actually unclear for the people who work there what leadership expects from them. So my recommendation is to complete the strategy and also make it very specific with short-term objectives. So in the SAFA system that I mentioned, they had a more complete organizational perspective. The system says you need to start with a good design in terms of strategy, structure, and systems, and then translate that into good leadership and good value creation processes and measure your performance. And the system, as it was designed, I think, by Swiss people and German people, you can imagine how many indicators do you think they had when we as Norwegians ended up with 30 or 35? 10 times as many. So just look into it and we'll find lots of good ideas about how to become more sustainable. So this is about leadership development. And as I mentioned, there are at least 3 different ways of educating leaders or influencing leaders to become more sustainable in an organization. It's to define it as part of the roles and expectations of them. It's to train them to understand more about ecology and the impact of the business on the environment. Or we can go to the center of their hearts and talk about their values and authentic leadership. So most people who have actually hit a crisis in their lives and hit the wall, many of them end up with a different perspective on life and see how closely humans are connected to nature and how much nature is in us and how much we need nature to feel alive and have a good state of mental health. So number 1 here addresses what's closest to our heart and what we really need to have a satisfying life. So here you see the 2 principal approaches. You can either start on the outside and like the shell of the organization and define a strategy, organization, role and resources and all that. Or you can start on the inside in terms of touching people's hearts and asking them to commit to the idea of becoming a more sustainable and climate-friendly organization. So summarized, you can start on the outside or on the inside. The best thing is to find a way that's useful for where you are and where you need to, or the easiest or most convenient way to move forward. So don't wait, just start doing something and see how it goes. So to summarize, I've been through a very intense 10 or 15, 20 minutes in terms of what's sustainability, what's a sustainable business, and how to develop sustainable leadership. So I hope I will have many questions in the next session. So thank you.
So Ineka is basically joining us. She'll be discussing the green growth model, and she is the CEO at Din Bärkraft, and her expertise lies in sustainability, strategy management, innovation, and business development. So yeah, Ineka, over to you.
As I said, I'm going to present the green growth model, which was developed by Per Espen Stoknes at the Norwegian Business School. And it consists of 6 steps to integrate sustainability into the organization. But before I do that, I will give some context first. Next, please. Due to our enormous resource use, especially since the 1970s, we are now beyond the safe operating space for humanity in 6 of 9 of the planetary boundaries, including climate change and biodiversity. And yes, I can share the slides. This increases the risk of irreversible environmental changes, and therefore, in order to get us back within the planetary boundaries, some well-known international agreements have been made, such as the Paris Climate Agreement. Next. Next, please. The UN Sustainable Development Goals. Next, please. The UN and most recently, the UN Biodiversity Agreement. Next, please. Therefore, many believe that we need to go from today's gray growth, where both value creation and resource use increase, to green growth, next, where we create more value with less waste, and thus with less resource use and less emissions, with the goal of getting us back within the planetary boundaries. In order for organizations to accomplish this, you can use the green growth model. And as you can see, it consists of 6 steps that go from changes in the external to the internal levels of the organization. And while the four, I need the, thank you. While the 4 bottom steps, first of all, they are about reducing the negative impact on environment and society, while the top 2 primarily are about increasing the positive impact on the environment and society. And the complexity increases with each step you take. And thus, the sustainability becomes more and more integrated into the organization with each step. And the model can be used as a tool for continuous improvement. And it is natural to work on all levels at the same time, and it varies from organization to organization which step it is most natural to start with. Next, please. Thank you. Outreach, the first step, is about doing things outside the organization's usual operations that show commitment to sustainability, such as, next, for example, you can do like 800,000 Norwegians did last year and collect waste, which can actually be a fun team building activity. Next. Or you can go into research collaborations like Trefedder and Beyonder did. Next. Or join sustainability networks, such as, of course, UN Global Compact, Shift, or Klimapartnere. Next. Or support nonprofits, such as the Red Cross, for example. The second step, house cleaning, is about leading by example and cleaning up your own house in terms of waste management, energy, and resource use. Because if you want to be credible when you start making demands on others, you need to have your own house in order first. You can, for example, reduce waste. Next. Increase recycling. Next. Or reduce energy and resource use. And next, here it's also natural to implement an environmental management system, such as Miljöfyrtårn or ISO 14001. Next. Or at the very least, a greenhouse gas accounting system that shows you where you should cut your emissions. Next. Does it, for example, make more of a difference if you cut your emissions related to your buildings? Next. Food? Next. Or transportation, which together account for 70 to 80% of all our emissions. Here you can also take simple measures, such as avoiding the use of single-use plastic or disposable plastics or items, or switch to light bulbs with sensors. Or next, you can do like more and more people and install photovoltaics on the roof. Or like next, the Norwegian Royal Palace and establish flower meadows to increase biodiversity. Next. While, and the next step, procurement is of course about using your purchasing power to set sustainability requirements. And here it's necessary to go through your supply chain and ask yourself, do your suppliers meet the requirements for sustainability? For example, regarding the environment, human rights, and working conditions. Because in Norway, Åpenhetsloven, next, or the Transparency Act, shall promote companies' respect for human rights and decent working conditions, as well as ensure the public's access to information. And Åpenhetsloven primarily applies to large businesses, but just as the EU's taxonomy, it can quickly affect the rest of the supply chain too. So you might as well be prepared. Next. And while gray procurement primarily focuses on price, green procurement has a positive impact on the climate, environment, and people, and creates green competitiveness. And since emissions from the value chain often account for 80 to 99% of the total climate impact, many can make a big difference here. And by setting sustainability requirements, you can contribute to the suppliers becoming more sustainable too, and thus create a green ripple effect out in the supply chain. Here it is also about asking yourself, are the purchases really necessary? And can products be replaced by services? In addition, next, it is about prioritizing buying from suppliers who already are sustainable and buying fewer and better products and that last longer. Next. One example is Haag's well-known office chair that probably some of you are sitting on right now, which was elected Norway's most sustainable chair. Next. And the chair in this picture is made from snow poles that would otherwise have been thrown away, and thus an example of circular economy. And speaking of furniture, next, the public sector annually throws away 7,000 tons of usable office furniture worth at least 100 million crowns straight into the trash. So many more should do like Asker municipality, which when they move to new offices, they focus on reusing their old furniture. And by doing so, here are a couple of examples. Can you please go to the next picture? And also the next. The result was that they saved 16 million crowns, 90 tons of waste, and 234 tons of CO2 equivalents. Next. For those of you who would like more information about green procurement, I suggest having a look at Schiff's 10 principles for green procurement. Next, please. The next step, operations, is about improving resource productivity by restructuring operations and optimizing systems for production and delivery of products and services. And one example next is when Posten and Bring switch from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles with the goal of becoming emissions-free by 2025. Next. And when Hydro achieves 15% lower energy consumption than the global average by optimizing technology and production. Next. Here it's also about having good systems that contribute to quality, efficiency, and less waste. Next. And the question you should ask yourself is, how can you deliver the most possible value using the least possible resources? Next. Product portfolio is about phasing out resource wasting products and services and replacing them with innovative alternatives, a conversion to greener products and services. Next, please. One example is when Toyota first went from fossil fuel cars to hybrid cars and then to electric cars. Next. And here it's important to take the entire life cycle of a product into consideration and use renewable materials that are easily recyclable. Next. This Haag office chair, for example, is made of 52% recycled materials and can be easily dismantled so that each different part can be easily recycled too. Next. I think I'll skip a little bit because of the time. Can you go to the next, please? Next, yes. You need to ask yourself, how sustainable are your products and services? Next. Business models is considered the most important step and is about innovation and change of the business model towards a circular or dematerialized way of creating added value, such as next, going from the products, books, CDs, and DVDs, next, to the services, Storytel, Spotify, and Netflix, next, or from selling clothes, next, to renting them out like Fjong does, next, or like Toast Ale that brews award-winning beer with bread that would otherwise be wasted, next, or like Gluten that collects coffee grounds from different organizations and uses it to grow mushrooms that they sell on to restaurants. Next. As you can see, this step is full of new business opportunities for those who think outside the box. Next. So to work strategically with sustainability is, as you can see, a continuous improvement process, just like any other business development. And this requires green leadership in form of words, money, and action. The words must show direction, money must back up the words, and action is needed to implement the strategy. And here you can jump over that one. You might as well get started because, as Nicolai Tangen says, if you don't take this seriously, no one will want to work for you. No one will buy your products, no banks will lend you money, and no insurance company will insure you. So, next. My recommendation is that you define measures and take action on all the 6 steps and use it as a tool for continuous improvement. And by doing this, you can integrate sustainability into your organization. And this way, you can ensure that you do your part in contributing to reaching the international agreements. And that way we can go back into a safe operating for humanity within the planetary boundaries. Thank you very much for your attention and good luck on integrating sustainability into your organization.
Okay, well, thank you so much for such an insightful discussion, Ineka. I think we'll move on to Rebecca now. I hope the problem is sorted.
I'm going to reintroduce myself very shortly in case you forgot who I am. I'm Rebecca. I come from Circular Norway. I'm a project manager, project leader for our e-learning course. And I'm going to talk a little bit about circular economy and why that is a really good tool for more sustainable development. So there you go. For those of you who have not heard of Circular Norway, Circular Norway is an impact organization that helps Norway accelerate the transition to a more circular economy. We do that alongside our international partners, for example, Circle Economy in the Netherlands, which is one of the biggest organizations in the world within circular economy, and Madasto, for example. And we support politicians, governments, different organizations, businesses. We work together with educational institutions. So we work across the board with different ways to accelerate this transition. So yeah, we work with national governments, cities, and businesses in different ways. We do have different services. Here you can see some of them, which are based either in digital services or more consulting services. It goes from training to analysis to strategy help, where we help with business models and strategies. So I'm not going to go too much into that because there are more interesting parts. But yeah, this is us. So we do a lot of knowledge boosting, you could say, in different ways. Either it is publishing reports, or if it's doing presentations, workshops on my e-learning course, not my e-learning course, our e-learning course. So yeah, we work across the board. So why circularity? The big question. I think Knut, he touched upon this a little bit in a very good way, which is the fact that we have, since the Industrial Revolution, had a massive acceleration in economic growth, which has also resulted in the fact that we take out more and more materials from a not infinite resource pool. So we basically have coupled growth and material use together, which has a lot of negative effects. I think he also touched upon this topic here, which is that Norwegians, we consume more than any other country. Here you see the OECD report of how we're doing on the SDGs in 2022. I think this is quite interesting. You can see here at number 12, responsible consumption and production. You can see it's red. Major challenges remain because we are consuming more and more. And we consume more than we need as well. So it's a very important question of how we can kind of decouple this material extraction globally as well from the intensity of the resource use to achieve equity and equality and to meet our basic needs, and not necessarily what we see as a culturally nice, cabins and boats and all of these luxury items that we don't necessarily need. So we need to find a way that allows us to get materials to cover our needs and to kind of question as well what those needs actually are. Because we do need materials to build infrastructure, to build hospitals, houses, roads, in different places in the world. And then we need materials, and we have to ask ourselves, where do we get these materials from? So what I think is a very good statistic here is that you like seeing the relationship between circularity and sustainability is the fact that extraction and processing of primary raw materials is actually responsible for 90% of biodiversity loss. And that's because we are, as has been touched upon, we're using a lot of land to build different constructions to extract these raw materials, amongst other things. And then there's also the effects of climate change, of course. And then 90% of water-related issues, 50% of climate emissions, and 33% of health-related issues. I think this is, the first time I saw these numbers, it kind of blew my mind. But then when you think about it, it makes sense because when we extract materials, we need materials to use the machines that are extracting the materials. We need to transport the materials. We're actually ruining the land when we take out raw materials. So this is the linear take, make, waste system that we have gotten used to. And it's just not really working. And it's wasteful as well. So what we want to do instead is circular economy. And I really like this model. It was actually an academic model to begin with that looks into something called narrow, slow cycle or close. It used to be called close and regenerate. And it shows you the kind of system change that we need, because I think probably a lot of you have heard of circular economy, at least some of you, and might think of the R strategies, which are reduce, recycle, repair. There are 9 to 10 different strategies, which are all great. But what I really like about this one is that it allows you to see the kind of system change that we need. And we need to have all of these different changes at the same time. So I'm just going to allow you to look at it for a second. And we can start at 1. I'm just going to try and explain it to you. So we'll start at 1 with narrow, which basically, as you can see, is at product design. So product design is super important. When we design something, we have to use less materials in general. And there's so many different ways to do that. We can discuss that in the breakout rooms afterwards, if you'd like, different strategies to achieve this system change. But it can be, for example, that we design for multi-purpose use. A product, you look at the need that we have, and you try to maybe cover different needs at the same time with the same product. It can be that you're designing lighter objects that are lighter to transport across the world, or it can be many different ways. And then you have slow, which is that when you're actually using the product is made, product or building or whatever it is, you have to make sure that the lifetime of this item, let's say, is as long as possible. So you can do that in many different ways. You can slow the resource lifetime through repairing, through refurbishing, many different ways to make sure that the item is actually made or is actually in use as long as possible. It can also be a good quality, that you have an emotional attachment to, the jacket that you have. You want to keep this jacket for as long as possible because you really like it. It's something you invested in, right? And then you have the end of life. So when this, let's say, jacket is not, you can't patch it up anymore, you can see here that the line goes into smaller dots. That means we break it down into materials again, and it should be easy to recycle it. It should be easy to make sure that you can see as you go in the back to the product design that it can be used again. And then regenerate just means basically make clean things, use clean energy, don't use toxic materials or toxic blends. So when you look at all of this together, there's, I would say, hundreds of ways to do all of these, but it's very important to kind of ask yourself and assess your business, which one is most relevant for me to really look at. And it's very important that I don't only look at one of them. I have to see the whole system, and I have to think through my entire value chain from product design. So before everything is made, you have to think about all of these stages. You can't just think about the end of life, which is what happens, unfortunately, quite a lot. So the main goal of what you're seeing when you're doing all of these things, automatically you will reduce the need for new raw materials because you have other raw materials to take from. If you look at this 4 cycle and you have a take back system as a business, you have a take back system where you put a product onto the market and you really want the materials to come back to you so that you can use the materials internally to make a new product later. You won't need new raw materials, and then that will automatically reduce that massive growth that we saw. So yeah, as I said, all of these are very important. We can't keep the focus on the end of life strategies. That's a very linear way to think. We have to think about all of these different stages at the same time. Just a little important factor as well is that we're seeing that for the finance people here, there is something called linear risk, basically, which is the risk that you potentially can meet in a linear business model in the future markets, because the markets are changing, right? And what we can see is in a very changing world these days, there's also the issue of security of supply. We can see that a lot of the critical raw materials that we need for renewable energy sources, for example, are coming from very concentrated parts of the world, as for example, China, who has a lot of the critical raw materials in the world. And then it makes it also a geopolitical issue. It makes it an issue of asking yourself, will I have security of supply of materials if China had entered, Taiwan, and how would that have affected my supply chain and safety of where I get materials from? How would it affect my prices? So since the list of critical raw materials is expanding very quickly, we can also see that, for example, prices are pushed up quite a lot. We saw that the critical raw material list published by European Commission grew from 14 materials in 2017 to 30 in 2020. This just underlines the graph that we saw in the beginning. We don't have an infinite pool of resources to take from, but we do need certain resources to build a more clean world. And then we have to ask ourselves, how do we deal with that problem? We can just, I kind of like this statistic of how it shows that it's actually very, it's not just a climate, what can you say, argument or sustainability argument that you should do circularity. For a lot of companies, it might also be a question of survival, you might say. You can say that, as the fact says here, the supply of nickel to batteries for electric cars could collapse. So copper prices grew 90% from 2020 to 2021. And this is because of all of these different things that we just looked at. So basically, very short, we need circularity for many different reasons. We need it very much because we need to figure out these different issues that we're especially struggling with here in Norway, consumption and production.
Og det andre det jo hvis du ser på flere miljøpåvirkninger. Og det tredje jo gjerne når det mange materialer, som for eksempel I et bygg.
Let me just.
Oh, sorry. Is there a question that I'm hearing, or is it? Okay, I'm just going to keep talking. But yeah, so basically, I'm going to try and sum up in the next 2 minutes. Norway today is only 2.4% circular. In comparison, Holland is to 24.5%, and then the global average is now 7.2%. So that's quite low. Luckily, we have a potential of 46%. So the potential in Norway is actually quite high. We can be better. And that's from the GAP report that Circular Norway published in 2020. I think some of you might have heard this number, 2.4. So here's a list of different things that we can do to make sure that we can reach this goal. Very short, the method is that we're using, we're looking at the materials that we have, fossil fuels, ores, minerals, biomass, and we're connecting it to the societal needs that we have. And then we're estimating circularity based on cycled materials divided by material inputs. And that gives us this beautiful graph. Just very interestingly, I want to kind of underline what Knut also was saying. If you look in the bottom left corner, this is the extracted resources nationally. If you look at the fossil fuels, the blue one, you can see that a lot of it goes to the top right corner, which is the exported, and that's not really even considered in our mathematical calculation here of how much is cycled, which is the very tiny little gray thing that goes from the societal needs on the bottom right and to back into the extracted and cycled resources that we're using to cover these needs. So we can get more into this later if that you would like, but basically very little is cycled back and a lot also go into stock, which is buildings and roads. So yeah, we can close the circular gap. And by doing that, we have also found that material footprint will go down 65% in Norway, and CO2 footprint will go down 63%. We need to boost knowledge, though, if we can achieve this. Only 1 out of 2 Norwegians have heard of the circular economy, which is why we're doing, for example, the e-learning course. Luckily, we're seeing a lot of new regulations coming from the government, which can create a new competitive advantages in a changing market. We're hoping that there's going to be this circular wave coming. There's been a hearing for circular economy in the Storting in Norway, and they basically talked about a tsunami of new regulations that are coming, and we're hoping that when technology for green solutions are more advanced, these changes will happen quite fast. Yeah, this is our e-learning course. I'm not going to go into that, but here is my name and my email, so you're very welcome to contact me after, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions and to discuss with you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for an insightful discussion on circularity as a system change and the issues that are involved and how can companies adapt it. Next on, we move to another guest of ours. He is Ernst, and he is basically representing the Tromsø Kommune. He'll represent and he'll talk about the environment and energy plan and how the municipality is playing an active role in creating a low emission society. He's a unit lead climate for environment and agriculture at Tromsø Kommune. So over to you, Ernst.
Yes, thank you. I hope that you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can. If you can move to the slideshow mode.
Okay, I try to.
Great.
There. Now you see the slideshow mode?
Absolutely.
Yes, very good. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, well, now we've heard some very interesting presentations, and now I like to share at least the experience that we have from the municipality of Tromsø, and that's of course a different actor in the whole field. We are neither a consultancy company or an ordinary industry, so we have to act in a different way. This one you know all. It is actually the sustainability development goals positioned in a different mode, but it shows them very well also the dependence between climate and environment, the social and economic parts of the sustainability development goals. And we as a community are actually involved in all these ones, but I will now focus more or less on the bottom part, and that is then the environment and the climate. Because I will tell you a little bit more about the process of making and implementing the climate, environment and energy plan that we have in the municipality. So then we go from global to local. How do we have all these sustainability development goals in a local plan? For that matter, we made in 2017 this CEE plan. And in this, we have 117 measures, and those are divided over climate gas emission reduction measures and climate adaptation, environment and nature issues, and energy in general. So how can we spare on energy use? But over this, and that is actually mostly communicated, are our ambitious emission reduction targets. 50% reduction of emissions in 2025 and 85% in 2030, compared to the reference year 2009. Well, we don't going to make that, but anyway, I will come in that later. When we talk about all these measures, I think it's also important that we distinguish between the measures where they act. For example, when you talk about the Tromsø municipality, you have the organization, and you have, of course, the community, the society. And this 85% or 50% reductions in the CE plan, that actually applies to the society. So we as all, we have to reduce our emissions there. But it's not about only about direct emissions as a community, as a municipality, etc. We also have our climate footprint, our indirect emissions. And you heard also in presentations from former actors here in the seminar that our footprint in the world is often much bigger than the footprint we have locally. So that's a thing that we have to keep in mind, I think. A little bit about Tromsø. Knut Ivar was in it. Tromsø is quite far in the north, far away from Oslo. It's about 2 hours by plane. And it's a quite large community or municipality. If you see the area, it's about 2,500 square kilometers. And we have a very long coastline because of all the islands, etc. It's almost 1,500 kilometers of coastline. And we have only 78,000 inhabitants. And those, if you can see the pointer, I'm not quite sure, but that live actually mostly in this area. And then we have also people living all around with schools and with people for elderly people, with houses for elderly people. Not so much, but we have them. So we have a lot of transport and we have a lot of roads, etc. And actually, one of the best ways to come to Tromsø is by plane, whatever you, if you want it or not. Then the Statistics Central Bureau, they produce often once a year these climate gas emissions. We get them always 1 or 2 years behind. But anyway, if you see the climate gas emissions that we have in Tromsø, then you see actually that most of the emissions are due to transport. This is maritime, this is road transport, and this one, the 8.8 is air traffic. Were figures in 2019. The 60 to 70% of our emissions are due to transport. And then another big emission source is actually waste incineration, which is then used for district heating. But these are waste incinerations, or it's in the incineration of waste from all of northern Norway. So they transport it to our municipality and burned here. And then you have, of course, construction that also has some emissions, of course. So you can imagine that we have some focus on reduction of these direct emissions. And that can be done by introduction of electrification or other zero emission technologies. You can do that in building and construction, road transport, but also by establishing shore power, if that's the right word, in harbors, where the big vessels can use their power source from land, just that they don't spit out all the diesel incineration fumes from their boats. And then, of course, by using other types of fuels like hydrogen, ammonia, and biogas. Another thing which is important, and I also think that some of the speakers already spoke about it, is that you maybe should delay doing things or don't do things, or that you that you plan in a smart way. And of course, you always have to look after the best technology that uses less possible fuel. But also mindset, do you focus on mobility or on accessibility? That is also things that you have to consider and that you can have in your plans. And then, of course, you have end-of-pipe solutions like carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and utilization of CO2. But what happens, that's actually this. When we introduced the plan in 2018, we based our figures on the emissions in 2009. And instead of things went down, they went up. And that is not at least due to the start of waste incineration in 2017. Then we were on a high level. We were a little bit helped by the pandemic, but afterwards it went up again. And if we just do nothing, you have a technology change, and the emissions will go down slowly. If you apply the measures that we have in our CEE plan, then these emissions will go down a little bit faster. But then we are still at 75% of the emissions in 2009 in 2030, which means that we are far from target. Targets here down. And if you want to get there, you really have to do some fierce operations. So you have essentially, shut down the society, so that doesn't work. Okay, but why was that? Why did the emissions increase and not decrease in spite of all the good ideas? Well, the first thing is that it takes time for measures to implement and also to give an effect. If you have a technology change, it is not that you push a button and then all new technology is on place. So that takes some time. Another thing is that we actually involved all stakeholders, so the industries and the people, a little bit too little when we made the plan. Also, we were very optimistic, so all the targets were much too positive. So what can be obtained or what is realistic is a good thing to ask yourself, but maybe we did that based on the technology and the ideas that we have those days, but they were too optimistic. And another thing is, of course, that all technology that you want to have is not available at that time. It takes time to develop these. Another thing is also that business and trade, they have their own dynamics. That we make a plan as a municipality is nice, but other people already had plans which were prepared long before. For example, the start of waste incineration for district heating, which is about 13% of our total emissions nowadays. They were not launched just in 2017, but they were already on the road. So another thing is that we are a community, and building and construction is going on. We have a new swimming pool, we have new schools, new homes for people, we have homes for elderly people, etc. So, and that is going up and down through the years, but it is anyway also an activity that we just need to have. And another thing, and that is very important to keep in mind, is that Tromsø is the transport hub for Northern Norway. All the materials, very many of the materials, the products, etc., which are meant for other people in the north of Norway, are actually transported to Tromsø first. Also, we are the largest fishery harbor in Norway. So this has a large contribution to all the emissions. And what we see then is that transport, air transport emissions and maritime transport emissions rise all the time. And the road transport emissions now slowly go down, but in total, it's still a large part of all the emissions that we have. So did nothing happen then? Yeah, of course, but as said, it takes time. What we did during the implementation of these plans is that we started and had dialogues with industries and organizations. We should have perhaps had them before, but it's never too late. So we have these dialogues to how can we make things better. Transition to zero technologies is happening. It is slowly, of course, but I think now it's accelerating. So today in the newspaper, we read that 12% of the car park in Tromsø is now electrical. So that's okay. We are a little bit behind compared to the rest of the country, but it has also a logical reason that we are far to the north, and it's not so easy to just go over to electrical cars because the distances here are quite large. And very important thing is also that we learned a lot, and we understand now better the complexity of climate and climate measures. And then, of course, it's not only about technology, but also change of behavior, and discussed also that should be inclusive also. So regarding business and trade, there's absolutely need for more dialogue and involvement, but we observe that industries are aware and they're willing, but they have, of course, also other targets, not only about the climate, but also about sustainability in economic way. Implementation of zero emission technologies has started for real, and also new technologies like carbon storage are now studied for implementation. Oh, and we did our own work also in the municipality. So slowly, but certainly things are changing. Important is also, as mentioned, for example, is the implementation of an environmental management system, Miljøfyrtårn, and that's actually a chain action. When we implement this, we put demands on ourselves to have a better climate and environmental behavior, but we also demand it from our suppliers. So that's getting down in the supply chain, and that's a very important for the longer term, but it's a thing that we think is important. Another thing is also that we now are in the process of implementing a climate budget, and that's also a management tool for investments and operations. Okay, what's next? We will now make a new CEE plan because an update is necessary. We have to implement the things that we have learned, and we also have to define new measures. Some measures are now done, other measures were not so good. So we have to update the plan or make a new plan. And very important there is that the measures that we have are manageable and that we have obtainable targets, not only things that's nice to have, but things that we also will obtain. It's possible to get. Then it's also very important that we distinguish clearly between measures for the municipality as an organization, as and a society. In our actual plan, that is a little bit, well, unclear, so here and there. And then the targets should be realistic. They can be challenging, but we think it should be aligned with the national programs also, and also, for example, the Green Deal, and be based on things that are also done in other parts of the country, because we are very dependent on what's happening around us. Then we have asked ourselves, did we have the right focus? A lot of climate gas emissions, but it's equally important with behavioral change to influence the indirect emissions and climate footprint. What do we buy and consume? Is everything necessary to have? Reuse and extended use was also discussed before in this session, and of course reduce waste and food waste. But I also want to point on environmental sustainability, which I think is highlighted not enough in the plan that we have. In spite of that, we have a lot of measures. It is not be in the focus. Natural environment and biological diversity. Look what was discussed in Montreal are very important, and of course we have to have more user and stakeholder involvement in the plan. So can we enhance then the transition to a low emission society? I think yes, we can be more effective because we now have learned a lot. We are now aware that we should include other shareholders in the municipality much more in making the new plan, and behavioral change is much more in focus on our side. New technology are maturing and better available, so that's also a thing that helps us. And we will put, at least as a proposition, to put the perspective of environmental sustainability much more clearly in our climate mitigation measures. We think that environmental sustainability is a precondition and also enhancer. Less is more. If you limit the possibilities to just exploit nature that we still have, you have to find for other solutions or just not do things. So economic development is instead of growth is also a thing that we have to focus more on. Circular economy is also important in this respect. And said a little bit before, improve nature and biodiversity, we should not destroy it. And that's coming to the end of my presentation. Nice view on what Tromsø looks like in that was in autumn then last year. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Hans. It was really nice to see what Tromsø Kommune is doing and the challenges that you face and how you plan to overcome them in the next couple of years, which is great. We'll quickly move on to our final speaker, Rhiannon. She is working as a data analyst with Rystad Energy, and she's going to cover how her company is leveraging data to facilitate companies in the transition to green economy. I think you will be sharing the portal, Rhiannon, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Okay, and everyone can see my screen. Everything is working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, okay, great. So today I'm going to be presenting from kind of a different perspective, really looking at the data and how you can use very fundamental, even high level data to get meaningful answers, create meaningful tools that can be used by project developers or investors to make the most informed decisions. And this is coming from a CCUS perspective, as I'm a CCUS data analyst. So here you're looking at our CCUS screening tool. And since we're coming at it from this perspective, using this data is also going to be a way to improve CCUS as a solution, make it more successful by being more informed. Yeah, so I guess we can get started. Here is just the overview tab, so I'm not going to go in depth on that. It's basically just a summary. But then we go into our emissions screening. So we're kind of doing almost a case study of how you can use this type of data to get meaningful answers. So here we're looking at point source emissions data, and this is at an asset level. So you can see on the map that we have all of the locations of these, and then you can just see the broad sector, whether this is industry, power, etc. And then below we have a table here, which provides a little bit more detail about each of these assets, but this is all still very high level, as you can see. So we get the broad sector, kind of more information about that sector. So we're actually looking at cement in this first one, and then the emissions and some locational information. So nothing too in-depth here. But we can really utilize this, even though it's high level data, to develop these tools that I'm about to show you. So the first one here is this emissions hub. So here we have created emissions hubs. So this is basically kind of like a density map. And you can see in this little legend that we've categorized them into different types of hubs. So we have tier 1 through tier 3, and then we have unihub, bihub, etc. So the tier is going to explain kind of the quantity of emissions. So whether there are a lot of emissions in an area or not so much. So tier 1 is going to be the least amount of emissions. And then the hub name that we've assigned is really talking about the type of emissions. So is this coming from one type of source, or is this coming from a variety of sources? So again, very high level, but here on this map, you can see that we've identified these hubs. And since we're looking at emissions, this is kind of coming from the capture perspective. So this is where you're going to find very good locations for developing a project specifically for capture. Because you can see, can you see my mouse? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So here, if you look at my mouse, you can see that the red ones are going to be where you have a high cluster of emissions. So this is going to be good locations for clusters projects for CCUS. So this is where you're going to have a lot of capture facilities, all sharing a common transportation and storage network. And this really kind of drives down the cost. It just makes the project more feasible. So that's what this analysis is showing you, is that these are good locations based on their emissions. And we just developed this using that very high level data that I showed you in the first page. And then we have emission hub analysis. This isn't super important, just kind of going into the distributions of these different hubs. So here you can see in the first chart, East Asia has a high quantity of tier 3 hubs. So this is going to be those very high CO2 density locations. So they have a lot of emissions very close together. And then we have the same thing showing for the different types of hubs as well as proximity to the shoreline. But obviously, if you're going to develop a CCUS project, you're not only considered in the capture side of things. You have to think about the whole value chain. So that's where we get into the other parts of the tools. So here we have storage. And again, we start from our base level data. So here we have depleted oil and gas fields, as well as saline aquifers. So here on the map, you can see all of these potential storage sites that are depleted oil and gas reservoirs, and we have already screened those to say that these are suitable for CO2 storage. And how we do that is using these parameters here. So if you have a look, most of these are focused on the geology. So the sites that we're showing here in the map are suitable for CO2 storage from the perspective of, is it technically feasible? Will this geologically work? So it doesn't have any other considerations such as policy or storage licenses, anything else, just will it technically work? So here again, we have some very high level data for each of these locations, again, mostly focused on geology since we're talking about storage. And then we do the same thing for our saline aquifers. So those are all in here. And again, very high level data for each of these locations. But we can use this information to kind of risk these areas. So here we have our first tool for storage, and this is our storage scorecard. So here we're looking at all of the potential depleted oil and gas fields, as well as saline aquifers that we've already said are suitable for CO2 storage. However, some are going to be better than others for various reasons. So that's kind of what this ranking is doing. So here, if we scroll over, you can see the actual scores for each of these locations. But how are we scoring them? So I can show you those parameters here. This is where we start to include other information. So we're not just looking at the geology, but also other factors that are very important to consider if you're talking about the feasibility of a project. So you can see this first category is infrastructure. So are we close to point source emissions? Are we close to gas pipelines, etc.? So is that infrastructure already in place? Then we have some socioeconomic considerations. Is there policy or investment in this location where these different reservoirs are? Do they have storage licenses requirements, or are there available storage licenses? And then again, you have your geological characteristics. Of course, these are still going to be very important since we're talking about storage. And then lastly, we do CO2 capacity, because even if all of these other parameters score perfectly, we have an ideal reservoir. If the CO2 capacity isn't there, this isn't going to be a very useful reservoir. So then we score them on those parameters, and we get some very useful information that we can provide to project developers as well as investors. So if it scores high, then these are going to be the locations that you would ideally choose, if you can choose, to develop a project, as well as if you're investing in projects in these locations. But even the lower scores can be quite useful for project developers and investors. So we can have a look at those really quick. So if something is scoring low, you can also see why is it scoring low? What considerations are we going to have if we choose a location that says has a lower score? So for example, if we have to have a project in South America, it's a whole continent, I'm sure we have to have a project there. You can see that a lot of these are scoring lower. But why are they scoring lower? Can give us a lot of information about some of the challenges we may face for developing that project. So for instance, if a specific site is scoring very high in the geology, so technically it'll work perfectly fine, maybe it's scoring low because you don't have that existing infrastructure, in which case that allows the developers and investors to know that transportation is going to be something that may need some work. They're going to have to invest more money in that specific spot. So that's kind of how the scorecard works. And then we also have the storage hub. So very similar to our emissions hubs, where again, we're kind of looking at a little bit of a density map. So we'll zoom in. Now we're looking at the North Sea. So again, we have tier 1 through tier 3. Which is basically going to say the density of assets, so number of assets that you have in a specific location. And then Unihub BiHub is your injection purpose. So can you store this for enhanced oil recovery? Are you doing it for permanent storage? Are we talking about saline aquifers? So a buy hub would have more flexibility about what type of storage you're going to do. So here we can see all of these different hubs and identify which are the ideal locations to develop storage projects. So now looking at storage as well, not just where our capture project should be developed. So that is what this is providing. Again, very similar to our emission screening. And then we also do a hub analysis. Again, not super important, just kind of shows you the distribution through the regions of the types of hubs that they have. And then lastly, which I think is the most important piece, we combine all of this information together. So starting from that very fundamental high-level data, going into the screening tools, and now overlaying those together. So now we have capture and storage in this map, which we'll zoom in again. And this also gives you a little bit of an idea of transportation as well. So are your high CO2 density locations very far away from your high quality storage locations? So here we can see an example of where we have a very high emissions density that is also very close to a very good storage location. So this would be, just looking at this map, would be a very ideal location to develop a project. As well as if you're an investor, to invest in a project that is going to be located in this area. And actually, if you look at a project map, this is where Humber project is located. So they've already decided that this is a good location. But I think that that is all really that I have, just kind of illustrating how we can use this data to develop meaningful answers and tools that project developers, investors can use to make the most informed decisions, which again is going to really increase the feasibility of CCUS as a solution. So I think that's all from me.